She had just spent 36 hours saving a life. But when Dr. Amara Okonkwo walked into a Toronto restaurant for a simple cup of tea, the manager took one look at her and said, "We don't want your kind here." What happened next was captured on camera, and within minutes it would cost him everything. This is the story of one woman's dignity in the face of hatred, and the moment when silence finally broke. Don't just scroll past. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it, talk about it, because discrimination doesn't end when we look away, it ends when we refuse to stay silent. The next time you witness injustice, will you be a bystander with a camera, or will you be the voice that speaks up? Your choice matters. Let this story be a reminder that our actions and our silence have consequences. Now the story in full. The morning air in downtown Toronto carried the crisp bite of early November, the kind that made people pull their coats tighter and quicken their pace toward warm destinations. The streets buzzed with the usual rhythm of a Thursday morning, commuters streaming from subway exits, briefcases swinging, coffee cups steaming. Among them walked Dr. Amara Okonkwo, her burgundy coat elegant against the grey skyline, her steps measured and purposeful despite the fatigue that pulled at her bones. She had been awake for 36 hours straight. The emergency surgery at Toronto General Hospital had taken 14 hours, a complex cardiac procedure that would have killed the patient without immediate intervention. Then there had been the post-operative monitoring, the family consultation, the paperwork that seemed endless. Her hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline that had sustained her through the night, and her mind felt wrapped in cotton wool. All she wanted was a quiet place to sit, a strong cup of tea, and perhaps something warm to eat before she finally allowed herself to go home and collapse. The Harbourside Bistro sat on the corner of King and Bay, its large windows offering a view of the financial district's gleaming towers. It was the kind of establishment that prided itself on being upscale without being pretentious, a place where Bay Street executives mingled with hospital staff from the nearby medical district. Amara had been there perhaps a dozen times over the past 2 years, always finding it a reliable refuge during long shifts. The staff had always been courteous, the food consistently good. She pushed through the heavy glass door, grateful for the wave of warmth that enveloped her. The lunch rush hadn't yet begun, and the restaurant was perhaps a quarter full. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee filled the air. She made her way toward her usual spot near the window, a small table that offered both privacy and a view of the street outside. "Excuse me." The voice cut through her fog of exhaustion, sharp and brittle. Amara turned to find a man blocking her path. He was perhaps 40, with thinning blonde hair slicked back with too much product, and small eyes that appraised her with undisguised hostility. His name tag read Gerard Whitmore, General Manager. She had never seen him before. "Yes," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "I'm afraid I can't seat you," Gerard said, his arms crossing over his chest. His voice carried across the restaurant, drawing the attention of nearby diners. Amara blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry? We have the right to refuse service," he continued, louder now, as if performing for an audience. "And I'm exercising that right. I need you to leave." The restaurant had gone quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence. The gentle clink of silverware ceased. Every eye in the establishment turned toward them, and Amara felt the weight of those stares like physical pressure against her skin. "I don't understand," she said slowly, though a cold understanding was already forming in her chest. "I've been a customer here for 2 years. Is there a problem?" "The problem is that we don't want your kind here," Gerard said, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is an establishment for professionals. We have standards." The words hung in the air like poison. Amara felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the familiar sensation of being reduced, of being judged not by the content of her character, but by the color of her skin. She had experienced racism before, of course, growing up in Montreal, studying at McGill, navigating the medical establishment, but it was always more subtle, more insidious, microaggressions, assumptions. This was brazen, public, and cruel in its naked prejudice. "I am a professional," Amara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm a cardiac surgeon at Toronto General Hospital. I've just completed a 14-hour surgery, saving a patient's life." Gerard's laugh was ugly. "Sure you are. And I'm the Prime Minister. Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but I've seen people like you before. Coming in here, causing trouble, trying to pull some kind of scam. I want you out, now." A woman at a nearby table gasped audibly. An older couple near the window had their phones out, recording, but no one moved. No one spoke up. They watched, transfixed and horrified, but silent. Amara felt something break inside her, not from weakness but from a terrible, clarifying anger. She had spent the night holding a human heart in her hands, literally keeping another person alive through the force of her skill and will. She had studied for a decade to reach her position. She had sacrificed relationships, sleep, any semblance of a normal life to become one of the best in her field. And now this mediocre man, this small-minded manager of a mid-tier restaurant, was treating her as if she were nothing. "I would like to speak to your superior," she said, her voice like ice. "I am the manager," Gerard said, smirking now. "There is no one above me here. So, unless you want me to call security, I suggest you walk out that door with whatever dignity you have left." The door chimed as someone entered. Amara didn't turn, couldn't take her eyes off Gerard's smug face. But she heard the sharp intake of breath, the sudden shift in atmosphere. "What in God's name is happening here?" The voice was deep, authoritative, and very, very angry. Gerard's face went pale. He turned toward the door, his posture suddenly rigid. "Mr. Carmichael, I didn't know you were coming in today." Robert Carmichael was a man who commanded attention simply by existing. At 63, he had the bearing of someone who had built an empire through force of will and refused to apologize for it. He owned the Harbourside Bistro, along with a chain of 12 restaurants across Ontario. But more importantly, he was currently serving on the board of directors at Toronto General Hospital, a position he'd held for 8 years. And he recognized Dr. Amara Okonkwo immediately. "Dr. Okonkwo," he said, his voice softening as he approached her. "Are you all right?" Gerard's face had gone from pale to grey. He looked between his employer and Amara, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. "Mr. Carmichael," Amara said, and her voice finally cracked. The exhaustion, the humiliation, the anger, all crashed over her at once. "Your manager has just refused me service. He told me that people like me, and I quote, aren't wanted here, that this establishment is for professionals only." The restaurant had gone silent again, but this silence was different, anticipatory, waiting for the hammer to fall. Robert Carmichael turned to Gerard with an expression of such cold fury that the younger man actually took a step backward. "Is this true?" "Sir, I can explain. She came in here looking suspicious and I thought..." "You thought what exactly?" Carmichael's voice could have frozen steel. "You thought that a black woman walking into my restaurant must be a criminal, must be a troublemaker? You thought that the color of her skin determined her worth?" "No, sir. I just..." "Dr. Okonkwo is one of the finest cardiac surgeons in this country," Carmichael continued, his voice rising. "She has saved more lives than you will ever meet. She works 100-hour weeks at one of the most prestigious hospitals in Canada. And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided she wasn't good enough to eat in a restaurant you manage?" Gerard was shaking now. "Sir, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Carmichael cut him off. "You made an assumption based purely on prejudice and racism. You embarrassed this woman in front of a room full of people. You violated every value this company claims to hold, and you did it in my restaurant, representing my business." Please, Mr. Carmichael, I have a family. I need this job. You should have thought about that before you decided to be a racist, Carmichael said flatly. He turned to the young hostess who stood frozen near the entrance. Call security. Have Mr. Whitmore removed from the premises. Then call HR and tell them to prepare termination paperwork effective immediately. I want him off the property within the hour. Gerard made a sound between a gasp and a sob. You can't do this. I have rights. I'll sue. You'll what? Carmichael's voice was dangerously quiet. You'll sue for being fired for discrimination? Please do. I would love to see you explain your actions in a courtroom. The entire incident has been recorded. He gestured to the dozen phones, still pointed in their direction. I'm sure it will make excellent evidence. Now get out. Security arrived within minutes. Two large men in dark suits flanked Gerard, who had tears streaming down his face now, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. As they escorted him toward the door, he turned back toward Amara. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the times she had swallowed her anger, accepted apologies that were hollow, made herself smaller to make others comfortable. She thought about the black medical students she mentored who would face this same prejudice throughout their careers. She thought about her mother, who had faced worse in the 1,970 seconds, and her grandmother, who had endured unspeakable discrimination in Jamaica before immigrating to Canada. Your apology means nothing to me, she said quietly. You weren't sorry when you humiliated me. You're sorry now because you got caught. You're sorry because it cost you something. That's not remorse. That's self-pity. Gerard opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. The security guards led him away, and the door chimed softly as they exited into the cold November morning. The restaurant remained silent for a long moment. Then, as if a spell had broken, people began moving again. The woman who had gasped earlier stood up and approached Amara. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, she said, tears in her eyes. That was horrible, absolutely horrible. Thank you, Amara said softly. I should have said something, the woman continued, her voice thick with guilt. I should have stood up. I just froze. I'm so ashamed. You filmed it, Amara said, glancing at the phone still clutched in the woman's hand. That matters too. Others approached then, offering apologies, condemnation of Gerard's actions, expressions of support. Amara accepted them with grace, though part of her mind noted the irony. They had all been silent when it mattered, when their voices might have actually helped, but she was too tired to be angry at them too. Gerard had been the perpetrator, but their silence had been its own form of complicity. Robert Carmichael gently touched her elbow. Dr. Okonkwo, please, let me seat you myself. And I insist that your meal today, and every meal you have in any of my establishments for the rest of your life, is complimentary. It's inadequate, but it's the least I can do. That's not necessary, Amara said. Perhaps not, Carmichael agreed. But I'm doing it anyway, please. You look exhausted. Let me get you some tea and food. He led her to the table by the window, the one she had been heading toward before Gerard had intercepted her. As she sank into the chair, the full weight of her exhaustion crashed over her. Her hands were shaking badly now, and she clasped them together in her lap. I was actually there last night, Carmichael said as he sat across from her. At the hospital, my niece was involved in a car accident. She needed emergency surgery. He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. You were her surgeon. Amara looked up at him, trying to place the case through the fog of fatigue. Then it clicked. The young woman, 23, blunt force trauma to the chest, aortic dissection. It had been touch and go for hours. Emily Carmichael. Yes, Robert said, and now there were tears in his eyes. You saved her life. The doctors told me that without your intervention, she would have died before morning. My sister and I sat in that waiting room for 14 hours, terrified. And when you finally came out to tell us she was going to make it, that you had repaired the damage." He stopped, unable to continue for a moment. "You are a miracle worker, Dr. Okonkwo. You gave my family hope when we had none." "I was just doing my job," Amara said softly. "No," Robert said firmly, "you were being extraordinary. And the fact that my manager treated you the way he did, in my establishment, after what you did for my family," he shook his head. "I am deeply, profoundly ashamed, and I am sorry. Truly sorry." "Thank you," Amara said. "Your apology, unlike his, I accept." A waitress arrived with a pot of Earl Grey tea and warm scones with jam and clotted cream, Amara's favorite. She hadn't ordered them, but somehow they had known, small kindnesses in the wake of cruelty. As she poured her tea, she became aware of movement around the restaurant. People were standing one by one looking at her, and then they began to applaud. Slowly at first, then building into genuine, sustained appreciation. The older couple by the window, the business executives at the bar, the young mother with her toddler, all of them clapping for her. Amara felt tears burn her eyes. She hadn't wanted this attention. She had just wanted a quiet cup of tea. But she understood what this moment represented. It was an acknowledgement. An apology, however inadequate, from a room full of strangers who had witnessed her humiliation. It was a small gesture of solidarity in a world that too often remains silent in the face of injustice. She stood and nodded to them, accepting their ovation with grace. Then she sat back down and focused on her tea, because ultimately she was still just a tired woman who needed rest. Over the following days, the video of the incident went viral. Multiple people had recorded it, and within hours, it was trending across social media platforms. The headlines were unforgiving. Toronto restaurant manager fired for racist treatment of doctor. Surgeon denied service after life-saving surgery. When will Canada face its racism problem? Gerard Whitmore tried to give interviews, attempting to rehabilitate his image. He claimed he had made an honest mistake, that he wasn't racist, that he was being unfairly vilified. But the videos didn't lie. His words, his tone, his contempt were all captured in high definition. Several employment lawyers told him he had no grounds for wrongful dismissal. His wife left him, taking their 2 children to stay with her parents. His mortgage went unpaid. His life, as he had known it, effectively ended. Some might have argued that the punishment didn't fit the crime, that one moment of prejudice shouldn't destroy a man's entire existence. But Amara thought about all the moments of prejudice that went unchallenged, all the times people like her had to smile and absorb the casual cruelty of others. She thought about the cumulative weight of 1,000 small cuts, of always having to prove herself, of never being given the benefit of the doubt. Gerard's life had been destroyed by one captured moment, but how many lives had been slowly eroded by countless uncaptured moments just like it? The Harborside Bistro implemented mandatory anti-racism training for all staff. Robert Carmichael established a scholarship fund in Amara's name for black medical students at the University of Toronto. The incident sparked renewed conversations about systemic racism in Canada, about the experiences of black professionals, about the responsibility of bystanders to speak up. But for Amara herself, life continued much as it had before. She returned to the hospital after her brief rest and resumed her grueling schedule. She saved more lives. She mentored more students. She fought the same battles she had been fighting all along, because one viral video didn't dismantle centuries of prejudice. 3 weeks after the incident, she returned to the Harborside Bistro. She came late on a Tuesday evening when the dinner rush had died down. The staff recognized her immediately, and the new manager, a warm woman in her 50s named Diane, personally seated her. "Dr. Okonkwo," Diane said warmly, "it's an honor to have you here." "Thank you," Amara said, "and please just treat me like any other customer. That's all I ever wanted." Diane smiled, understanding the deeper truth in those words. "Of course." As Amara settled into her seat and opened the menu, she felt something close to peace. Justice, when it came, was often imperfect and incomplete. The world hadn't fundamentally changed. But Gerard Whitmore had learned that actions have consequences. The witnesses had learned that silence has costs. And perhaps, just perhaps, the next person who thought to discriminate might hesitate, might remember, might choose differently. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Amara ordered the salmon, medium rare, with roasted vegetables. She ordered her Earl Grey tea. And as she sat by the window watching the Toronto skyline light up against the darkening sky, she allowed herself to simply be a woman, enjoying a quiet meal after a long day's work. Just a professional, just a person, just enough. The door chimed as someone entered, and life continued its endless rhythm, indifferent and unceasing. But in this small corner of the world, on this particular evening, there was a measure of justice, however imperfect. There was recognition, however belated. There was dignity, hard-won and fiercely defended. And sometimes, in a world that so often denied it to people like her, that had to be enough. Dr. Amara Okonkwo returned to that restaurant 3 weeks later, not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her space. She ordered her meal, sipped her tea, and reminded the world that dignity cannot be taken, only temporarily challenged. Gerard Whitmore lost his career, his family, and his reputation in a single moment of hatred, but this story isn't really about him. It's about every person who has ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. It's about the weight of discrimination that millions carry every single day. And it's about the choice we all face when we witness injustice. Don't let this story end here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have the uncomfortable conversation. Examine your own biases. Stand up the next time you see someone being treated unfairly. Real change doesn't happen in viral moments. It happens in the daily decisions we make to choose empathy over indifference, action over silence, and justice over comfort. The question isn't whether discrimination exists. The question is, what will you do about it? Your move